Well, hello out there. I think maybe I better get my paper and pen, though. Just a second. And here we are. Hey, so good morning. I've decided I'm thinking I'm going to have to lose my glasses for the live streaming for the circumstances when I'm doing the crazy circle light. Ah! But technically we don't have to do that right now, so I'll leave it alone. This is, after all, hey Ahmed, the plugin DIY Q&A. I may say there are some things I've never tried to do with this. For instance, there is a possibility of like bringing people in on the Discord and having them be doing a chat. And I've never tried to do that. Might be worth doing, or might be worth trying. Oh, another good reason I need to stick these glasses somewhere else is that these are actually more relevant for driving. If I'm just derping around the house, it's not that much of a challenge seeing at least what I need to see and being able to read your words and stuff. But if I'm driving, it's more difficult to see things like road signs. So maybe we'll just end up doing that. Or I can get some costume glasses just for looks, but they can be empty and not have anything inside the frame so that the light doesn't freak out. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, doing okay. I'm still feeling a little bit under the weather. A solid week or so ago, I bit my lip eating a taco, and it turned into a thing that just wasn't going to heal. I think this is just a general health and wellness kind of thing. And I've been trying to get back out there ever since. Also, there's a lot of stuff going on, like a bunch of changes and a bunch of new things to try. By all means, bug me right from the start. And so the thing about that is I found that it did, but you have to have some fairly extreme treble white noises, not necessarily the most extreme treble you could have. I can take a minute to go and look at the source code because the source code is uploaded. So that's one advantage of doing open source the way that I do is I can go consult it. And I will do that for you because our open source is here. I suppose I should check, like, are you on VST or audio unit? Because that matters, and you might be revealing that I have a bug that I need to fix. Because especially when things are kind of sketchy with me, stuff gets by me sometimes. I try to respond fast. You absolutely can bug me with one question. Go ahead. But yeah, tell me quick whether it's AU or VST, because that's the one I'm going to look at. Let me go back then. I was looking in the wrong place. Let's check and see. And I'm looking it up now. So that means my parameters should be working. is B I'm going to want to refer to. Oh yeah, and by all means ask me about BrassWriter. Okay, yeah, intensity is the power of B2 times 5, so I am using it for a thing, unless I failed to do it in the 64-bit. Nope, it's there too. No, I gotta tell you, that control does something. You might not be hearing it do anything. I did talk about how this is one of those ones like acceleration where it's difficult to hear what it does. And that is most certainly going to be the case. It's going to be difficult to hear what it does. But I have checked in the VST code. It does in fact do that. It does do a thing. I need to get my face off of this screen. Oop. I'll just find myself looking at it. I need to look at your chat and other stuff like visual aids I might be coming up with, which I have one. I have a new thing that's coming in that might lead to some form of video content and more time you folks can spend with me during the week, if you wish, either directly or sort of indirectly. But let me follow the questions first, because the questions are important. And I see you, Julian, Fortuna, Vittoria, Morels. So if you're looking for a phase rotator, I don't think a phase rotator would do that, but play with phase nudge. I'm told phase nudge is not actually proper phase rotator, but it's kind of like that because it's an all pass. Oh, you did try phase nudge. I don't have anything other than phase nudge. And honestly, if you don't fake doubling guitar would be my recommendation there. If you're going to be doing something like that, there's a lot to be gained from doing it properly. So if you're doing a doubling, I would say do your level best to just actually do the doubling. It's going to be a lot harder, I grant, but if you can't double sextuple, that's one of the things I learned about vocal stuff, is if you're doing vocals and you can't do a double track, do 6. And then no matter how off any given track is, it's all going to form a big sort of gang vocal. I need to glance at the I'm still drinking my coffee, excuse me. I'm going to need to catch up. Because there is some show and tell, which hopefully isn't going to cause me big problems at disassembling. Okay, so your question about BrassWriter, Bo, because you were for the first in line, apart from Ahmed not getting traction out of the limit control, and the limit control does do a thing. It's just that it's hard to hear what that plugin does. I mean, I was hearing it and I wasn't entirely liking it. That stuff that I was doing on the recording in the very brief video was sort of hyper boosting, and then when I put the limit on, it sounded kind of darker and grungier in a way that I didn't especially like, so go figure. But as far as the brass writer is concerned, sounds like you're saying it's an awesome de-esser. Could be. I have not thought of using like that, but it's not designed to do that. But if it works for you, then rock on. If that counts as a question, yay, go me. And Ahmed has heard the ZZ Top album. Yeah, the only thing, I feel a little bit sad about that one simply because I wasn't able to rope in one of the pro engineers I know who was involved with that. But the thing about it is, and yeah, I'm still working on the de-esser. We might be moving towards being able to release the updated de-esser. It's a question of how satisfied I am with how well it's performing. And no, I did not base the de-essers on Brass Rider. I could go and look up what Brass Rider's doing, but no, they're working in a different kind of way. It's doing something else. And it's probably using some of the de-esser code to observe cymbal crashes. So that might be the thing. So Julian is asking, the way I would mix a 3-piece band with one guitar is as a 3-piece band with one guitar. That's the thing. It's like, because you're asking me what I would do, and sometimes I would do things that are kind of audacious. Like, a classic example is Stax Volt mixes. Stax is a record label from back in the day. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to warn you that I might have to jump up and get a package because I have some stuff coming in and I'll show you some of it. There is no delay in the ducking of Brass Rider. It just doesn't respond quickly. But people, let's say Motown, were trying to figure out how it was that Stax Volt were able to get such loud records in which everything was so punchy and upfront and direct. And one of the answers for that is they had fewer elements going on. Like they'd have a guitar, a bass, clean, not especially resonant drums, stuff like that. So one of your options, if you have a very simple band, it's a 3-piece band with one guitar, is mix it with the one guitar. And your trouble there becomes, how was it recorded? Did it get recorded in such a way where the instruments and things sound big in the correct way? Because it's possible to take stuff and compress it and smush it and do stuff with it, just process it until it sounds controlled and doing fancy pan studio trick stuff, but really small. Whereas the whole thing I'm doing with talking about these evergreen albums is I'm trying to point out where the evergreen records are actually using a very naive form of mixing. Like they'll do things like put up a guitar and the guitar is just a guitar. And they're not even doing a lot in terms of equalizing it or whatever, because back in the day you didn't necessarily have an EQ on each channel, believe it or not. Like I'm reading a book about Led Zeppelin and the recording of all the songs of Led Zeppelin. And I found out that Led Zeppelin 2 was mixed on this Altec 250 desk, which is kind of hilarious because it's almost like it was mixed on an Altec 250 panel. Because it's just this sort of flat, like lower grade recording console kind of deal, and it doesn't have faders. The Altec that Led Zeppelin 2 was recorded on and mixed on, it was mixed on a desk that doesn't have faders. It doesn't have it has 2 pan pots. That's it. All it's got is like 8 giant knobs. for like balancing the respective levels. And so some of this, like again, Led Zeppelin 2, mixed on a desk that did not have pan pots or faders, much less EQ. This existed. This is stuff that happened. And we forget about this at our peril. The trouble comes when we're working with modern technologies and your recording chain, you captured stuff to the computer in such a way that it went through a pile of tiny little integrated circuit boards and stuff and came out the other end as your chain of bits in the computer that sadly represent something that doesn't sound especially big. And that's why people struggle to make stuff sound bigger and just need to do stuff. They want to apply analog tones and things. And they're trying to do all that sort of thing, desperately trying to make the source tracks sound bigger when they just don't. But one of the ways you can get source tracks to sound bigger is to turn them up. So if you have this rather weak track and you're trying to get the most out of it, one thing you might do is think like a mastering engineer and go like, okay, where's the weakness in this coming from? Maybe it's got sort of excessive super highs and super bass. If it sounded a little bit more like mid-rangey and punchy, it would sound a little bit bigger. So you take, say, if we're talking about plugins and ways you can deal with stuff like that, you could try taking the one track you've got that you're trying to make bigger and throw it in something like capacitor. Or throw it on a biquad and set it to a bandpass and have the bandpass Q be insanely low. And just kind of set it up in such a way where it's rolling off the extremes a little, which is kind of like what happens when you're running through an analog desk. And then use that as the cleanest way you can do to get that basic sort of tonal balance, and then turn it up rather than doing other stuff with it. Maybe a tinge of echo or reverb or something like that, but very faint. And yeah, so, and Ahmed, oh goodness. I have a plugin coming out that is called Cabs, and I've been resisting it because I'm just not happy with how it works, and that's the best that I ever got as far as trying to get stuff to sound like a real amp. And all Cabs is some impulse responses, and I don't know, man. You're asking me to do something that sounds like rock guitar amps. I could maybe do stuff using the biquads and types of distortion and things like spiral to get a kind of overdrive that would at least be really clean. That's not what people normally think of as amp modeling, but who knows, maybe it'll work. But that's the thing. And, you know, Kempers are fairly impressive, yet I still kind of get what you're coming from with that, because the thing about I still get a bit of a sense out of the Kempers of like, okay, on the face of this is super convincing and persuasive. But there maybe is something that is still kind of not as there as I would like. And it's one of those things, it's the issues with things like Kempers, and I'm trying to remember the lima bean shaped one, the pods. Pod is like issues with at MP3 level or 16-bit CD level, where it's a primitive version of the thing, and it's sort of you can find the problems with it fairly easily. I had a little box called a Johnson J Station. And that was kind of neat too, but it was the same thing. It was like problems at roughly the MP3 or CD level at best. And so you wound up having a tone that was sort of abstracted. It wasn't all that effective. And the thing about the Kemper is it's like problems at the 24-bit level, where Hey, David Pixley, ladies and gentlemen. It's a problem at like the 24-bit level where you could still find fault with it. Most notably, you're probably going to notice latency more than the actual tonality of it. There's also people who do pretty respectable amp sims, like, isn't it? I'm trying to think of the name of the guy that I'm familiar with. Hey, let's have a little fun and turn on our light. Just for laughs. I got it, might as well use it, yay. Here, the thing about, like, you can get a fairly decent downloadable amp sim that I thought was fairly respectable. It's like LeFou or LePou. It's worth looking up. I'm going to take a moment. Gotta shuffle my stuff around. Nope, LePou. LEPOU. And they're freely downloadable amp plugins, and I thought that guy was pretty good. Like, those are not so bad. As far as not sounding real, there's a whole variety of things going on there. Like, you can do some amazing Eurorack percussion using crude digital stuff like Erica synths, and I need to tell you guys about something that's going to be happening. Look, Erica synths. Turns out the way things have been going are such that I'm able to get in some stuff to build for my modular thing, and the best way to do that is to get kits. And so I'm going to be assembling some things like a delay kit, or indeed baseline kit. And this is surprisingly heavy. And I can go through that stuff and basically be like one of those people who gets sent stuff from the manufacturer and reports on it and builds it while you watch and that kind of stuff. But me not being that kind of person, I unfortunately have to pay for all of that crap, cash in the barrel head. And they're not giving me things to have or even to review and then take back. No, I just gotta... Fortunately, I'm in a position where I can throw a bunch of the Patreon money like straight at this kind of stuff. And it's always worthwhile reinvesting in your kit. So I'll be doing some of that. Looking forward to that. But to get back to the AmpSim stuff, one of the challenges there is that you're going to lack a degree of that realness, and cab sims aren't going to help you that much, I don't think. Like, all that, it's like a kind of reverb or whatever. What you're doing is you're having even more artificiality, but you're getting things more ambient and spacing them out. And that can give you textures. You can get a lot of good textures, but if you're looking for the kind of thing like miking either a clean amp or a loud amp with a single mic and putting that up loud, then what you will be lacking is just a bit of that immediacy, and part of that immediacy is in the performance. Like, once you've recorded it, you might, if you treat it right, you might be able to get stuff that is behaving itself pretty well in the mix. But the thing about it is, while you're playing through that stuff, especially if it's software plugins, like some of the hardware stuff like Kemper is designed to have very little latency for the exact reason that people start losing it when they have a lot of latency. They feel disconnected, and it gives them associations with the slightly compromised sound to the point where they just turn against it and they're like, this is a big fail that just sucks. And it doesn't necessarily suck as bad as that, but there'll be a degree of concern about that, and it's a small compromise. Like, you have to do stuff fairly, like, I mean, it would depend. If you had, say, for example, a Vox DA20 or a Vox DA10 or Vox DA5, because I'm thinking of those because I've used those for sort of busking with before. I can play Echo Jam into one of those little Vox amps with the delay defaults to chorus and Echo Jam. And Echo Jam is when you're going and somebody's gonna David's gonna sample that now and throw it in a piece of music. Go ahead. But if you're trying to get a sound that's amazing out of that, and because it's an amp you think that it's going to help, you're probably barking up the wrong tree, because if you mic that, you're going to be miking a real speaker, yes, but the amp itself is nothing but a digital model, and that's going to limit things somewhat. Usually if you're talking about miking an amp and having it sound really amazing, regardless of what you use to mic it, and I still favor modified SM57s for that. I'm using that in my own stuff. You're probably going to want to use some kind of amp that is just extremely raw and direct, or possibly something like a lot of people have gotten a lot of mileage out of either small Fender amps or big Fender amps for being just extremely clear and defining the notes incredibly well. And with that kind of stuff, you can get a clarity out of there that's just the sort of thing, especially if you're like playing strats and stuff and you're using mostly clean tones and all that kind of thing, where it's like, oh yeah, this is my tube analog wonderfulness. Those are the things where if you're in the room with it, it sounds like a nice pick to the ear. And generally the tone you're wanting to get is cleaner than you would expect, less saturated, less distorted than you would expect, and super duper focused and articulate to the point where it's almost not that inspiring until you turn it up real loud, and then it's like, wow, this is huge. But there are other sounds, like your heavy sounds, like your Mesas and things like that, Marshalls and such. Marshalls are sort of a hybrid zone, because one of the things about Marshalls is, like, I should talk about some of these comparisons between amps. If we're going to talk about amps, I can at least run with that a little bit. So far as quickly asking about reamping things, yup, you totally can do that. There are some famous sounds that are all about being reamped. I watched a video on Depeche Mode the other day, and it was the Black Celebration or the Black Collection, something like that. I got it over there, but I can't read it from where I'm sitting. And their early period, when they started moving beyond Speak and Spell, they went through a phase where they were heavily reamping all the synthesizers. That is a super valid thing to do. Reamp stuff, put stuff in hallways or mic them from the other room or whatever. Just do all that kind of stuff. And it is a huge jump in the direction. As long as you have a microphone and a preamp that you can actually mic things and have it be like even half decent. And you don't necessarily have to be super loud as long as you're not afraid of background noise. You could be relatively quiet, and what you're mainly losing is clean background noise, but that just makes it be another kind of thing. It's like all of a sudden now you have bird noises because you left a window open, and you're literally hearing like the cars going by, and that becomes part of your recording. You just build it in. But reamping is a huge deal. I mentioned Depeche Mode and sort of their mid-early stuff and onwards. And they were heavy into reamping, sampling, but also reamping. And then, yeah, I have one of those tiny little Marshall practice amps. The opposite of tiny little Marshall practice amp is Genesis Mama. That's a reamped sound. It works great to do things like if you've got a drum machine or whatever, and you're like, this drum machine needs to be huge. It's totally not huge. What can we do? They ran it into some kind of little Mesa Boogie combo and turned it up until the amp was like jumping off the floor. And real live amp, real live microphones, they got to record the ambience in the room because it was that loud. And yeah, you can rock with that kind of stuff all day long. There's all kinds of things you can do. For instance, I have another plan as far as something I'm going to be doing once I sort of get my stuff together enough that I can start getting my drum room back into shape, because I have a bookcase and a disassembled Behringer electric piano or electronic piano that I'm essentially disposing of. I'm probably going to just give it away somewhere in town. It's cumbersome to move around. And once I clear that out, I have an upgrade in mind for my drum kit, because I want to get it built up to a point where it's got like, I have owned a set of rototoms for it for a really long time, and I'm super hot to get that back in action, like come up with some kind of framework where I can set them up again and have the rototoms be playable as part of the kit. It would probably look really cool too. And the secret to that is another Led Zeppelin 2 trick. And I figured out how I can do it for myself, and it'll work great. I just haven't done it yet. Here's what you do. I do have the drum kit. I'm making it in a weird way. I'm making it from the sides, which I'm finding is working out pretty good. I'll have three mics when I finally get it sorted. And there will be a mic from the front that's mainly pointed at the bass drum. And the mics from the sides are basically for like side miking the hi-hat, side miking the snare drum, getting more of a room sound out of things and less of a close-up mic sound out of things. And I'm finding that's working out pretty well for me as long as I position the mics okay. Then, here's the secret that I'm going to be doing that you can, or anybody can do, that is similar to what was done on Led Zeppelin 2. Not that I'm John Bonham, but there's a way that I can get a degree of the thunderousness out of that. I'm going to buy a 4x8 of like wafer board or something to make a tiny stage out of. That's literally what I'm going to do. And I have some bricks. The bricks were from the back room of my house when they sort of developed it and stuff. And part of doing that, there was an extra room added way before I lived here. And there was a pile of bricks that were left when they broke down like a previous stoop or something. And so I fished a bunch of the bricks out, and now I have a bunch of bricks. So I'm going to take the bricks and bring them up to the drum room, take the drum kit down, place the bricks so that there's like at least one underneath where I'm sitting, and then like 4 more out in the corners, and then place the 4x8 on top of those, and then set the drum kit up on top of that. And that means I'll have, it's at least I probably don't need to get it any beyond that. 4x8 is probably going to be enough. But if I do that, for the price of a 4x8 wafer board, probably will have to be at least heavy enough to stand on, to set up a drum kit on. I will have that sort of resonating stage, and that is something that a number of bands, I know for certain, I read that Led Zeppelin were doing that for Led Zeppelin 2. But I am trying to remember who else. Like, I'm wanting to say Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and Damn the Torpedoes. I'm not positive, though. And then, of course, there are bands that were literally recording on stages or whatever, and so they had a resonant wooden stage going on and set the drums up on those. But you don't actually need to build a full-size real stage. What you need to do is have a resonating wood panel up off the ground, even a tiny amount. And I'm pretty excited about that. That'll be cool. So let me look at the chat again while we keep going. We're talking about amp sims again. And again, I don't have one per se, and I'm not necessarily the man for doing... It's complicated because it's like you can do digital distortion that's lacking the aliasing that causes a problem when you're distorting stuff like guitar tones. And I'm not the guy for that. There's other people who do better at the heavy oversampling and downsampling that you do to avoid aliasing. But I also don't like the sound of the oversampling because there's too much going on there. So I don't know. I guess what I'm going to have to do is put together a pile of biquads and saturations and some gain going in there, and probably do it in a whole series of gradual stages rather than trying to do it just slam one thing super hard. And probably do it by just, for a little amp thump, you'd have a really tight resonant zone down in the lows, and you'd separately amplify that and then include it, and so on. And I'll see what I can do. There's other stuff that's in the way first. Like I still need to put out that monitoring update, and I still need to put out that DS update. And I've been asked for cabs now, and I'm still working on a special stereo design. But yeah, this is the way in which I don't wind up running out of stuff to do. And that's exciting in its own right. But yeah, looking at the... I was going to make a point about the digital amp sims as follows. There's some stuff out there. For instance, there is a famous... It's the math rock band. I'm a big fan, so I should remember their name. When I'm a little under the weather, one of the things that happens is I'm going to be flaking out and not being able to think of things a lot, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So, and one of my favorite math rock bands is Dillinger Escape Plan, but not them, the other one. There's a famous interview, or a famous to me interview of these two guys talking with each other, and like Jens or whoever, the lead singer for this other band, is talking to the Dillinger guy, the guitar player Ben Weinman, who basically ran Dillinger because Dillinger stopped being a thing, and Ben is very, very like, oh, no, yeah. The band name I'm thinking of is Meshuggah. And Ben's asking, saying like, oh, when I first heard your band, it was completely amazing. And I don't know, we're just not worthy. And so your band is so amazing. And Jen looks at him and goes, your band's something crazy, man. Your band is something insane. But not with saying effing either. And then they cut to Dillinger doing Panasonic Youth on stage. And like, yup, they're insane. They're completely insane. But Meshuggah, with regard to digital amp sims, here's the thing, is for, I think, Chaosphere, they were doing entirely digital amp sims for the super heavy stuff. And of course, they are djent, D-J-E-N-T, the metal genre called djent. And djent is kind of a follow-up of, for instance, what Pantera was doing, with just incredibly bright, incredibly crunchy, and the pick attack hits you like a tambourine or something hitting. It is just super aggressive, and it's a physical impact. And oh yeah, I am going to find a CD copy of the Dillinger album with Mike Patton singing, because I know exactly what you mean. It's amazing. I have never heard anybody that could believably cover "Come to Daddy" by Aphex Twin and carry it off. And they managed to cover that and carry it off, and it's just bonkers. But yeah, I think Chaosphere or something like that. I forget the exact name, but there is a key Meshuggah album that's extraordinary. It's super, super good. And yet the guitar tones are totally synthetic, but in such a way where, what the aliasing that you get off of amp sims and stuff, their choice of music and what they're doing with it makes that be the correct artistic choice. It's a situation where, because of what they chose to do with it, you would not want to make an analog chain with like higher fidelity and less digital grit and whatever. Instead, they're doing exactly the right thing. So, mind you, Meshuggah is a pretty distinct tonality. Like, you could legitimately say that, well, maybe not everybody wants to get into a zone like that. But it really... people's musical exploits are based off of the sounds they're able to make happen. Which is why I hammer on the evergreen stuff so much. Because it's like, if you have just loud guitars and amps and stuff, and then you don't have a drummer, so all you have is like a Boss groove box that you can also run through an amp, you have like a Big Black, Steve Albini's old band, where it gets into that Nine Inch Nails kind of sound, where you've got artificial robot drums, but maybe they're cranked out in such a way that they're super obnoxious, or they're just amped to make them sound louder. And that becomes an aesthetic. That becomes a thing that you can do with them. Or you have Meshuggah using the digital amp sims, and then some of these albums they make are just so stark and forbidding and just ruthless, and the attack of the band and the guitars and drums and things like that are so focused, partly because they're getting that aliasing and stuff, so their sound is more like a percussive hit rather than a super detailed picture of what that string is doing. There's a spatter, there's a white glare on it. And similarly with some of the old hip-hop, you got old hip-hop where it's being done on these Akai samplers and groove boxes, the MPCs, the things with the pads in them. And when they did that on those old pieces of equipment, the samplers were a little gritty, they were a little dirty, they were low bit, they're like 12-bit in some cases, and low sample rate, which is, I've been still getting more MIDI verb ones, because I feel like now that the word is out, now everybody knows. So it's like, yep, okay, so I'm going to get a backup just so that I'm not without it. But the reason the MIDI verb 1 sounds the way that it does, so that I like it best, is because it has less sample rate than any other one that they ever did. They quickly got into, hey, MPC user, yep. Elisa's quickly got into like CD quality for their reverbs and started putting across like what they considered a full bandwidth. I don't think anybody other than maybe, oh God, what the hell is the guy's name? Whatever. People don't usually go for a super high sample rate in reverbs because it doesn't necessarily help you. But that original MIDI verb, you get 10K out of it max. And then the MIDI verb 2 will go to 15K. And then beyond that, they're like, hey, we're CD quality, we're 20K. Resolution is clearly the important thing here. And I'm like, well, no, you're a reverb. You can't hear reverby sounds at 15 or 18K because they don't happen. They die away in the air. Air itself attenuates them. Bouncing off of walls with soft surfaces attenuates them. So you quickly lose all of that, so it's pointless to have it in the first place. So you might as well have a low-res reverb or do that in some kind of way. And when you're dealing with the amp sims, one of the things you can do is build stuff around those limitations. And I think I was talking about the hip-hop, where the samplers were low bit, perhaps low resolution, not necessarily, not always. Sometimes the samplers could go up to brighter sounds, but they'd be rolled off. They would have that brick wall filter in there so that they would not extend above, say, 10K, 12K. And then you'd have the person recording, and the rapper on the old hip-hop would be using a microphone, which not uncommonly would be putting out frequencies beyond that, so you'd have a spotlit vocal, so you can pay attention to it, and then the background sound is going to be band limited and also bit crushed, which tends to make stuff be more opaque, and it makes it harder for you to focus directly on that. So you'd have the beat behind the rapper. You're supposed to pay attention to what the rapper is saying, so it lets you do that. And you're supposed to have a loud driving beat, like pulsing rhythmic qualities. And that's literally what's happening with that. And it's all because of the limitations of the original sampling devices. All this kind of stuff works. And that's another reason why I encourage people to get into the evergreens type stuff that I'm talking about repeatedly. Because if you are recording in such a way where you, by default, record your thing by like DIing or putting your microphone up to a speaker or yourself, and you don't know about recording, so you're automatically like you're popping into the microphone all the time and then using plugins to try to remove the pops, or you've got the microphone dead center on the guitar speaker and then you're using plugins to remove the excess brightness and trying to fill in some of the space around it, which you've, by miking choices, removed in the first place. If you're doing stuff by default like that, and you don't have experience in, the way this stuff the way people had to do this stuff back in the day when you didn't have these fix-it tools, and they had to get the sound right, like straight out of the mic. And then you're automatically bringing in these plugins and things, you're going to start working from a place where your basic sounds are limited and you don't even recognize what's good about better sounds that you might be getting. And that'll control the kind of genre that you can work in, that'll control the kind of music that you can put out, and it'll control what sounds good or what doesn't. You'll have it where it's like, oh man, I have to do 4 guitar tracks to get this to sound good. Otherwise, it just sounds really small. How do I do 4 guitar tracks? Or how do I, automatic double track. Like I'm echoing this thing, like the questioner earlier. I'm echoing this thing to another track and putting it in stereo, and I need to put a phase rotator on it and delay it to make it sound bigger because I only have this one original track. And like re-recording it is not an option. Recording another track is not something that I'm doing. So I need to do this and I need to do that. And then you wind up with this pile of tracks that all you can do is kind of make a texture out of it. And it starts to determine what you're able to do with the mix, what you're able to do with the piece of music. And again, this is why, I go to like the same friend who wasn't able to pitch in on the Trey Hombres podcast, which is sad but understandable, has a forum that I like going to. I got invited to. And I like being there. It's a bunch of cool people, a lot of whom are these old school engineers that did some of this stuff back in the day. They're currently being kind of upset at the way that the Giles Martin remixes of Beatles stuff are sort of butchering that work. And then I have other people who are big fans of what the Giles Martin remixes are doing because they like the, mixed creativity of and this is glittery and bright and it's over here, and then this is compressed so you can hear all the little details of that and stuff. And that's something that you do when your original recordings aren't actually any good. But it also replaces the original work. And I have complicated mixed feelings about all of this because it's on the one hand, I think that that's absolutely horrible. But on the other hand, it's well, maybe it's time to make the Beatles be less important and move beyond that. If you can't even get Beatles music to sound the way that it actually sounded back in the day, then you have to do things like turn to, if some of the Rowdy Beatles stuff suits your fancy, then go check out King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. And that's digitally mixed in many cases. But it was recorded in these old school kind of ways to intentionally get those sounds. So it's meant, that's recent enough that they're not looking to remix it in order to get a particular effect out of it. It's nope, that was released yesterday. You can get the album, Infest the Rat's Nest, or Fishing for Fishies is another interesting Gizzard album. You can get that. Nobody's talking about remixing that to get away from the retro sound qualities because that's just what they chose to do. It's not oh, this is old. How do we get it so that people will play it on radio these days? It's they're a touring act. They're not worried about the radio. They're worried about servicing their rabid, screaming fans, of which there are tons. And part of the way they did it is going for this sound that really owes a lot to old school recording techniques. And that's a whole approach about the simplicity and choosing of doing. Oh, Bo, you're trolling me. You're trolling me by claiming that you can make Abbey Road so much better. You know how to make it much better? Record a different song. We don't need new parts added to classic Beatles stuff that existed and have been a fixture culturally for just decades upon decades. And furthermore, the Beatles don't need to sell any more. We don't need to have more Beatles coming out. It's fine. We've had enough. Make new music. Support new musicians, for God's sake. We don't need the Beatles taking up the air in the room when new musicians are freaking starving and you can't get heard. This is goodbye, YouTube monetization bullshit. I mean it. It's just nonsense. It's terrible. I will sacrifice YouTube monetization in the purpose of a good cause. And I will finish my coffee since I clearly haven't had enough coffee. So yeah. Um, yeah, Ahmed, you mentioned DIYing an ISObox. It might interest you to know that I did that. My amp is inside a larger box that is covered with towels, and it's not a perfect ISObox, but it's possible for me to do it. Bo, I'm not especially interested in listening to those remixes. Put it this way, whether I want to or not, I'll hear them one day, because you can't get the original mixes now. Get me? Whether I want to or not, if I hear it playing in a public space in some kind of way off Spotify or whatever radio still might exist, I won't get to hear the original version because you can't get that anymore. The new mixes drive out the old. So if there's anything worth hearing, as I've made a case for, in the original work that was done, like, for instance, having it be done in the classic old Abbey Road, tube-powered mixing consoles. Granted, not the album Abbey Road. The album Abbey Road was the first done in a transistor mixing console. But even that was, like, back in the day, grade, very primitive. Oh, sure. There's many things you can say that sacrifice monetization. If I say my plugin bit shift gain, they think I have said a B word that's naughty and unrespectful about women. And they will sacrifice monetization on the name of an unrelated plugin. I've been joking about that for months on end. The bright side of that, I guess, is that YouTube monetization is relatively worthless anyway, so it's a real losing game to try to get stuck into that. I'm not kidding you. These are things that are worth knowing about, too. That's one of the reasons I like live streaming a lot, is as I ramble and rant and carry on about this kind of stuff, you'll get information like that you need to know about. Thomas has a quick question. Channel is not the same thing as either console or bus colors. Zafor, you were the one who was looking for this. No, I haven't given them any listen for this Fairlight kick. But you mentioned in your email that, one of the songs was Monophobia. I think that might have something to do with why he did that. Generally, you are going to want mono kicks. You're going to want mono bass information. But I don't know, man. Joel Deadmau5 is a playful character. I'd love to hang out with that guy sometime. I don't think it's likely, but I know if I live long enough or make plugins that are so good that he actually likes them and knows about them, because this is a guy that pokes around paying attention to stuff and will learn about things like this. But yeah, if he did a song called Monophobia, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he was doing weird stuff with the basic sounds of the song so that they resisted being entirely mono, because that sounds like the whole point. I think I know the answer to your question, Bo. It is, I Want You, She's So Heavy is a John song. Paul would not have spent the time doing that. The song that Paul spent incredible amounts of time trying to do a vocal track for on Abbey Road is, of course, Oh Darling. And it's in Jeff Emmerich's book, which I recommend. I've got a copy of that. I've read a lot of it. I've read it a lot, meaning that I've read it cover to cover 5 or 6 times at least. But the reason that it took Paul 10 days to do that is because I forget whether it's either the first thing that he did when he came in or the last thing that he did before he went home. He would take one take of the song per day and just fry his voice out, blow it out completely in a single go. And then he'd go home. which is actually a smart thing. Like if you're doing a track where you're doing the vocal performance, and this is the basically where Paul was coming from with that was, this is the vocal performance where I'm going to out-rock John, because they got competitive with each other in that way. So if you're going to do that, you don't necessarily want to be like, I'm going to stay here all night until I have out-rock John. I'm going to spend hours shredding my vocal cords, doing multiple takes of this. That will just hurt you. So what he'd do is, again, either coming in the morning or going home at night, he would be doing that one take and just trying to drive himself super far and damage his vocal cords doing it, just like push so far that you're like, man, you're going to hurt yourself doing that. Don't. And then he'd do one take and be done and be like, okay, that's it for today. And that's how he prevented himself from losing his voice entirely during the recording, is he saved it up for that one thing, then did the one attempt, blew himself out completely, and it's like, okay, that is my try for the day. Now I'm going to go rest up and have some nice tea and have my vocal cords recover. And then the next time he came in, he'd try it again, and eventually they got one. But that is the reason why that is done in the way that it was done. So one thing that you can do for making, and since I haven't looked at it yet, Zafor, you can tell me, when you say sphere-like kick, you're talking about an oscilloscope shape. Do you mean it's like a circle? Or do you mean it's like a filled area that's all blurry? Because I haven't listened to it. One of the things that you can do is offset, especially if it's a single frequency. You can do what they call as a quadrature oscillator. So in my Eurorack stuff, I have a couple of Doepfer sine generators, and they're quadrature oscillators, meaning that there's a sine and a cosine output. And the way that works is, hey, I get to use my paper. You got one frequency that's like that, and then you've got another frequency that is being produced, and it is offset to a specific degree. And with a quadrature oscillator, you can generate this. And then if you were to take this one and invert it, you would get the next stage. Like, here's the one wave, here is the oscillator, and this is what you get when the first wave is inverted, is it starts the opposite way, and they neatly add together. So a quadrature oscillator means that whatever the frequency is, you're going to generate a sine, and the sine's going to start here, except for that if there is the cosine output, that is offset this much. Now, if you take these and put them into a stereo output, like this is your left and this is your right, you're going to get a weird effect. It's going to be sort of sideways. And if you took this as your left and then the inverse as your right, you get literally out of phase, and the vertical picture in the oscilloscope is purely out of phase. It's literally to the side. If you're vertical, you're completely in phase. They're left and right is both the same thing. And then if you have the quadrature one, I think that's going to give you an angle. So in order to do a circle on the oscilloscope, what you're going to do is some kind of, I'm not exactly sure, but some kind of funky offsetting. And clearly he was up to some madness like that, possibly even using the same tools. Like if he was using his modular stuff on that, he could have been using that same Doepfer module to generate sine waves, control them in such a way that it's doing a sweep, it's making a kick drum, but then using the quadrature oscillator factor to generate like a neat little circle on the oscilloscope, and I'm not exactly sure what that would require. It would require, yeah, vector audioscope is the kind of thing. If you're trying to draw a circle on your oscilloscope from left-right content, this point is both of the waves in phase, and so is this point. And this point is both of the waves out of phase. So you gotta kind of swoop over to where these are in phase, and then they're entirely out of phase at this stage, and then they're back in phase again, and then they're out of phase again. So maybe what's going on is a quadrature oscillator that's doing some kind of frequency doubling. I'm not exactly sure how it would be done, but, you know, Dead Mouse, I gotta say, I've got a bunch of his CDs and stuff, and he is good at coming up with these funky, clever things to do. And yeah, you can do really bonkers oscilloscope music, although the music factor of that is often kind of limited. You know, like music, maybe not so much, but you can sure draw pretty pictures in an oscilloscope if you try. I'm still going back to Thomas's question, Thomas's question, which is, channel gets put anywhere you want. It's just a tone coloring thing. Has some saturation. You can use any version of channel you like. It won't matter. And the console versions generally want to stick within the number, and an earlier version of console is the one that works with bus colors 4. So the current stuff isn't really not that so much. You can always mismatch them. They just won't work as anticipated that way. It's always tricky when people are asking me about that, because the funkier you get, the more you get into a zone where it's like, I can't guarantee this is going to work normally for you. It might wind up sounding kind of weird, and maybe that's fine. People often are looking for like the correct answer, though. And the main correct answer there is use versions of console that match up, because those are the ones that cancel out completely, and use them with unity gain with each other, which doesn't necessarily mean unprocessing them for submixes. You can have submixes that are fine, but, you know, Zafor is probably right as far as the mouse using a unusual sub to get a O shape, if indeed that's what he's getting. Certainly clever. And then layering mid and top samples and things to make it more musically interesting. Because that's the problem with some oscilloscope music, is you get really interesting shapes, but sonically they're kind of generic. They're just sort of funny waveforms that are usually pretty harsh to listen to. And it's hard to get stuff like that that's really, truly interesting. Although I feel like you could very easily have percussive sounds work that way. That stuff is often pretty gritty and harsh sounding, so you could use it as percussive elements. Have like a very empty mix without a lot of reverb in it, and then just have brief bursts of these sounds, and then it would flash little shapes onto the oscilloscope screen very briefly, which would be part of the music. So that'd be neat. You could just isolate little snippets of that. You could even do it in the form of stereo samples, if you had, say, a stereo sampler, or if you're in the box. It would be just as good. And isolate the oscilloscope pictures that you want to create. Do them in any sort of way. And then take little short audio snippets of it, and you will flash images onto the screen for the duration of that sound, and the duration of the sound, and the harsher and uglier they sound, the better. That becomes your percussive element. Honestly, persistence of vision means that if you're using an oscilloscope for this kind of stuff, you could use very brief percussive noises and have that work out great. So sounds like that is a way of making the oscilloscope music more musical. Because all you have to do is make the cool shape that's consistent and doing what you want on the screen, and then make it for an incredibly brief period of time so that the harmonically dense point is a percussive noise. And then it doesn't sticking around long enough for you to annoy you, but it's sticking around long enough that the persistence of vision shows you that picture on the oscilloscope screen, flashing on briefly. That would work great. That'd be a way of doing that. Probably worth finding, again, either in the box or, and you could write a program to synthesize oscilloscope shapes, or indeed a plugin. There's a thing. You could do a plugin generator for that, so this is going to go on my list of, because all you need to do is be generating the shape in audio in a stereo plugin enough to be able to make a test tone out of that stuff. Or gate it. That would work just as well. Gate it. And then you're good to go. So that would work too. So Patrick is asking, Purist Air airband above 25K? Nope, especially not when at a 44.1K sample rate. It's definitely not above 25K. It's just really bright. Sound mode has a bunch of... Rock on, okay. Well, then they can continue to have the bunch of synths, but if I come up with anything that's particularly cool, I'll put it out as a free open source plugin so that people who are experimenting with their own stuff can start with that and fool with it or whatever. I haven't noticed that many people running with the open source stuff, though. People like dragging the entire library into their things, but I'm not sure if there are that many people who are starting to learn about this stuff through like reverse engineering my plugins, and that seems a shame, but I think it'll eventually happen. Yeah, anyways. I wanted to bring up something else, especially since I still have like 45 minutes to go on the stream. And yeah, I could go off and rest. I'll sort of accept the reality of maybe not being quite so with it. I've drunk enough coffee to be chattering away like mad, but I'm still enough under the weather that my thoughts are maybe not as connected as they should be. I'll just have to rest up and get back into the swing of things. And I'll doubtless have a burst of intensely productive work stuff where I'm getting a bunch of things done. That'll be pretty cool. But, gosh. So, no, Purist Air is not an airband above 25K. It's just an airband that is up around the Nyquist frequency, whatever that is. And it was an experiment, so it's one of those things where it's like, it is what it is, go forth and discover it. And yeah, what I just brought up like 2 seconds ago and then forgot immediately because I'm a little burnt and tired. I've got 45 minutes to get suggestions for the next evergreens. I'm going to be doing another evergreens on Wednesday unless like an insane number of people bail off the Patreon and leave me briefly under the threshold for doing that. And I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. And even if it did, it doesn't last for all that long. So I'm probably engaged with the Evergreens podcast for the duration now. And I've got my kit set up so that I've developed the tech on it so that you can actually hear the records I'm showcasing. And again, this is a patron thing. Granted, I'm not like copy protecting it amazingly. So people who find access to that, if you're going to be spreading it all over the place, I would just ask that you rehost the files so that I don't have to pay huge bandwidth costs. Just treat it as piracy. Be like, I've got the MP3, ha 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 ha, and then run off with it. But for patrons who have direct access to this sort of stuff, I'll have another Evergreens coming up. And I am looking for suggestions, and I have just got one. Two. A Miles Davis suggestion and Back in Black. So that's, I know some things about Back in Black. That's a possibility. We could talk about that. Well, Ahmed, do you see that I have Charles Mingus? Because it's got to be stuff that I actually have. I'd like to get records and have a big collection of all that stuff, but it's going basically from, and it's Mingus not Ahum. I do know that much about it, although I've never actually heard that album. I'd like to. I'd like to get more of those old jazz albums. Maybe I can someday. But yeah, it's Mingus Ahum. So yeah, do I have a second on Back in Black? It's a kind of major record to just go right out the gate with. But on the other hand, it's a major record that people will be interested and excited in. And I've got like 160 or more other ones. Oh yeah, the Miles Davis stuff that I've got, I think, 2. If I'm not mistaken, up in that collection. And one of them is only 1 disc of Bitches Brew. Yeah, I do. I have that. But I only have 1 of the records, which is a bit of a shame. And then I think I also have In a Silent Way. I've got a number of different ones. I wish I had Kinda Blue. I don't have Kinda Blue. I've got Sketches of Spain somewhere. With the Evergreens, I'm basically going for the record bin that I have literally over there. I can see from where I'm sitting. But I do have more to draw upon, and I could end up doing that. If I do, I'll update my list, because the list on the Airwindows Evergreens page is what I have as resources. I also can't guarantee that they're all in perfect condition. So some of them might have clicks, like the Tres Hombres. I played one track where it started clicking quite loudly and even skipped. And it's like, well, okay, I won't try to play that through again because that skipped on me. And it's mostly just a big list of stuff that I have literally sitting over there waiting for me to do. So do I have other suggestions, or do I have a second for Back in Black? Remember, Zafor, there is no us guys. This is all literally just me doing everything here. Everything in Airwindows, everything in the streaming, everything in the Evergreens is literally one person doing all of it. Which is kind of daunting, I admit. There's a lot of stuff where it's like, oh my God, you mean I have to do this and mow my lawn? And yet I do, or I have to do this and go grocery shopping. But as far as Pink Floyd, nope. I've been setting up the recording systems using my very nice copy of SHVL 804, which is better known as the LIM. Yeah, you keep bringing that up. SHVL 804 is, of course, the desirable copy of Dark Side of the Moon. I've got that. I can do that at some point. I'm not sure that this Wednesday is the time to do it. So let me do a quick question. I have 2 specific requests, not counting Bitches Brew, which I don't have all. I don't really like the idea of doing that one because I don't have all the albums. Maybe I'll try to find a copy of it somewhere. But Elheim this is not the first time they've asked for Fly Like an Eagle. Bose just asked for Back in Black. And Ahmed is asking for Ziggy Stardust. Do I have a second? Here, let me. So. Who was that saying? Ahmed. So I'm for Eagle, Bo for Black, Ahmed for Ziggy Stardust. Do I have anybody seconding any of these 3? It looks like everybody's fixating on their own one. Can we get a consensus about which one to do next? And bear in mind, if you keep mentioning it, I'll be like, oh God, I better do this. But I'd like to get more than one person behind any given one. There's multiple things good about either of these. Like Fly Like an Eagle, I can talk about the compression because everything is insanely compressed. That's one of the key things about Steve Miller Band. And I can probably also find out what the synthesizer part is for the lead into that and play it. Back in Black is famous. It is a classic album just as much as Dark Side of the Moon for like testing out audio stuff. You'll be able to hear what it really sounds like. And I have a book on AC/DC where they talked about a bunch of that stuff, so I do have some technical details on Back in Black. I could talk about that. Ziggy Stardust I have some technical details on, although not that many. And I have a copy of it, and it sounds nice. And I'll be able to talk about pretty much the same kind of basic inspirational, like do the old school stuff thing. So what's it going to be? Ahmed is siding with Back in Black next. Elheim, are you okay with Back in Black, or would you like to argue people into doing Fly Like an Eagle, Steve Miller Band? We're going to go with that. Bear in mind, I do have Ziggy Stardust. We can get back to this in future. I got Hunky Dory, too. That one's cool. There's a whole bunch of neat Bowie that I can do, but looks like we're going between Fly Like an Eagle and Back in Black. Haim, are you cool with doing Back in Black this coming Wednesday? Oh, Zappa record. Somebody has got the key to my heart there. If somebody suggests a really amazing Zappa record, I can probably run with that. Oh, all right. We're going to try to do Back in Black again. I have a bunch of information on that, like, for instance, I know some of the details for what kind of amplifiers were being used on things like Let There Be Rock, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, Back in Black, and so on, so I can give a bit of a history. I know why the guitar blend is the way that it is, and what, like, Angus was using for a guitar, and what Malcolm was using for a guitar, and why. And I know one of the secret tricks to how at least Angus and possibly both Angus and Malcolm got their guitar sound literally for the album Back in Black. Plus, some of the stuff around how Mutt Lange worked, which is not specifically from AC/DC, but also from knowing about how Mutt Lange approached, say, Def Leppard. Because Lange did his Pyromania and Hysteria for Def Leppard. And there is a classic albums take on the recording of Hysteria, which you know as the Pour Some Sugar on Me album. And yeah, you might not have ever considered getting the classic albums for Hysteria because he might not have been that much of a raging fan of Def Leppard. But let it be known, if you're interested in that you get this Hysteria Classic Albums DVD and watch it, which I've done a bunch of times. Again, I've watched that many times because of what I was able to learn from it. And you're going to get a bunch of interesting information about what Mutt Lange was doing in the studio, which is very similarly to like what Mutt Lange was doing in the studio when he took AC/DC and transformed them from like the Let There Be Rock period to Back in Black, For Those About to Rock, and so on. Completely changed and transformed the sound and gave it that Mutt Lange sound. Now, AC/DC, unlike Def Leppard, were not as easily swayed. AC/DC were pretty much unswayable. They had their sound. They did their thing. Also, for Back in Black, they just lost their lead singer. They lost Bon Scott, who they loved. So it was a heavy time for them. But Lange still had a great deal of effect in how stuff was recorded and set up, because he was also a very, and is presumably, a very strong-minded individual. Ahmed, did you see my Zappa list? I'm going to take a moment to go back into the... I wonder if I have that bookmarked. Probably not. That's okay. I'm going to go back into my Zappa list and the Evergreens page just to read off the Zappa that I've got, because you may not understand. Highway to Hell was... Okay, I'm honestly surprised. I thought he came in with the Cars and Shannon. Yep. Actually, no, it wasn't the Cars, Roy Thomas Baker. Anyways, I'm not pretending to be all that much of a master on this, but let me read off the Zappa that I have available, okay? Because if you're wondering whether the Zappa comes for Evergreens and you forgot that I had it, okay, so here's the list. Freak Out, absolutely free. We're only in it for the money, not the CD, original vinyl with the original tracks. Zappa was one of the first people to re-record stuff because the multi-tracks that he used to make the CDs out of had deteriorated, so they lost stuff. But I have the original vinyl. So, Freak Out, absolutely free. We're only in it for the money. Uncle Meat, Lumpy Gravy, Weasels Ripped My Flesh, Hot Rats, Burnt Weenie Sandwich, Chunga's Revenge, First Flo and Eddie, 200 Motels, classic Greatest Flo and Eddie. Also possibly recorded on film. As in optical audio recording. Fillmore East, classic Filthy Flo and Eddie. Just Another Band from L.A., that's Billy the Mountain. Waka Jawaka, post Flo and Eddie. The Grand Wazoo, post Flo and Eddie, also mostly instrumental. Roxy and Elsewhere, amazing sounding Roxy and Elsewhere. Overnight Sensation, classic Montana, a bunch of the hits. Apostrophe, most amazing sounding album also, and classic Ainsley Dunbar playing the hell out of the drums, and some of the most amazing playing is on Apostrophe. One Size Fits All, also amazing sounding. I have some skips and things with this record, but on the whole, even if it does skip, it's worth hearing. Zoot Allures, Studio Tan, Orchestral Favorites, Shake Your Booty, Sleep Dirt, which is kind of cool. Joe's Garage Acts 2 and 3, in which there are little details like amazing synthesizer solo on Cyborg and stuff. Also a bunch of really filthy story. Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, which is an amazing album, or 3. You Are What You Is, Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch, Boulez, Conduct Zappa, Jazz from Hell. That's the Zappa collection you can choose from. Yes, Joe's Garage and Joe's Garage Acts 2 and 3. So when people want to call on Zappa, I'll be able to play you some classic Zappa off of vinyl. And Zappa never respected vinyl, but all the same, he made some of the greatest. That is one of the highlights. Studio Tan, yeah, funny thing about that. That was also used by Walter Becker. When he was alive, he was on some of the forums that I hung out on, and like the PRW recording, the Pro Recording Workshop, back when that was the thing. And he took the username Studio Tan and then posted a picture of himself as he was being incognito, but his avatar was a current picture of him in such a way that you might not, if you weren't following things, you might not recognize him. But if you'd heard or seen the Classic Albums DVD, you've seen a recent Walter Becker image. And so I dropped him a note. I was like, just so as you know, Walter, I recognize who you are. And from the comments that he was making, he clearly was Walter Becker. He wasn't talking about his own stuff or Steely Dan or anything. But the way he was sort of snarking about stuff, it's like, yep, there's the guy. I dropped him a little note saying, just so as you know, you're not using your name or putting your name anywhere, but I still recognize who you are from your style and also from that avatar is clearly you. And he was like, oh yeah, thanks, man. And I never got to have a conversation with him. He passed away some years back, which is what's happening to all these golden age of rock and roll or golden age of mid-70s classic hit records. Golden age of evergreens, we'll call it. These guys are passing on and leaving their knowledge is just evaporating. So people need to talk about how this stuff was done, because during the time, people didn't necessarily know what was driving all of people couldn't get enough records. They got hugely into them. And recently, what's happened to the making of records is such that people no longer give a shit about them. And, it's like, okay, you can have streaming income. You can make $22.39 for an entire year streaming of a hit record. Go nuts. And it's pretty terrible. So I think it's worth it trying to get some of this information out there. And if people start doing it, I think you'll find that people get enthusiastic about the results if the music is backing up the production choices. But part of the production choices that have been killing music is the whole idea of going okay, first thing we do is record some kind of mediocre track, and that'll probably do. And next we're putting it together into a perfection in the studio. It's like, no, that's terrible. Stop doing that. Nobody's going to care. It's not interesting. It's like a computer-generated beat, More interesting to figure out how to extend things in such a way that it's telling an audio or sonic story. Like I mentioned, Burnt Weenie Sandwich, the inside of the gatefold of that is talking about how it is a movie for your ears. And yeah, it's a movie for your ears. And back in the day that Frank was doing this, using your classic vinyl and analog techniques and doing a phenomenally amazing job, you didn't even know how amazing it was because they weren't necessarily using super high quality playback technology to listen to it and playing it at a volume high enough that you get a real sense of it. That entire time, everybody kept trying to, we need more treble, we need more bass, we need more clarity, we need more CDs and stuff. And they were actually going away from the fullest sound picture that you could have by making stuff better for more and more limited, like everything had to sound amazing over a transistor radio. Everything had to sound amazing over garbage playback equipment. And it was trading off what was actually there. And, everything had to sound amazing with garbage performers. And constantly trading off what was actually there for these like false economies of things that are seemingly impressive, but don't really stand up. Oh, by the way, there was an old question where who was it who was asking, like, can I add harmonics once at a time? No, you can't. There's no way to add harmonics one at a time. The only reason that works in PAFNutty is if you are using literally a sine wave at exactly the right volume. That's the only way it gets transformed into literally another sine wave at a different frequency. Without that, you're nowhere. So you can't actually add individual harmonics. That's not what PAFNutty is doing. It's just doing another weird kind of distortion that acts like transforming into a different harmonic if you're feeding in a full wave sine wave. That's all that is. So, yeah. And tell you what, people are so excited about Joe's Garage. I'm going to add that to the list of do soon. I still think it better do Back in Black next, because that's just like, that is a audio production significant record in a way that Joe's Garage totally is not. Especially if you mean the original Joe's Garage and not 2 and 3. I grew up on 2 and no update on the sorting algo plugin. It'll happen one day when I have the actual problem solved. I don't have the problem solved yet. So you're not getting Joe's Garage this Wednesday, but I'll remain open for like doing that soon, and it's nice to have some stuff sort of planned, and we'll get to it. Again, the reason that I don't want to do that over Back in Black is I have lots of information on Back in Black. It is significant in production ways, like I can tell what things are being done about it. I have a entire book written about AC/DC that talks about their work live and in the studio and the way they grew up and all that kind of stuff, and cites a bunch of equipment and gear and choices that were made along the way where I'll be able to usefully talk about stuff. And I have nothing like that on Joe's Garage, nor is it of special production significance even for Zappa. So that's going to be more along the lines of, I'll get to it once I've covered the first choice, which, reasonably can be Back in Black. But it'll be nice to get, the funny thing about this is I grew up on a bunch of Zappa records. Some of them I didn't have at first. Some of them I had early. I had Apostrophe super early and grew up with that record. And there's a bunch of things I know about that as well. Like I can tell you how to get the guitar tone on the solo for Cosmic Debris. That is a known factor. I know some of the things about the background for it. I know some of the things about the intensity that caused it to be the way that it was. Because Apostrophe was recorded during a place of intense personal trauma for Zappa, and I don't mean his falling off the stage and breaking his neck, because that was what killed the Flo and Eddie version of the band, was Zappa falling off the stage and breaking his neck, and then having to do several, rather bitter and abstract instrumental albums, namely Waka Jawaka, The Grand Wazoo. But for Apostrophe, he was back into doing songs with vocals and stuff, songs that were expected. This is post-Overnight Sensation. He was kind of back on the charts there. But during Apostrophe, if I'm not mistaken, Gail had given birth to a child, I think it was Ahmet, perhaps, who was in the hospital, like premature or ailing in some kind of way. And they were really worried that his kid wasn't going to make it. So he's doing apostrophe all day long and then sprinting to the hospital to like see his new little baby and be like, hang in there, dude, you're going to make it. So there was a personal intensification factor going on there that isn't always the case. That's very similar to what was going on with Peter Gabriel when they recorded The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Similar thing. Intense, personal, meaningful thing. That is making all of the choices of recording the album more resonant, because you can still keep doing your weird stuff of singing about poodles and whatever, but then when real life is that intense, everything just kind of lights up a little bit more, and so there's an additional focus. So yeah, sounds like there is a set of possibles. Maybe I'll just keep a list of possible things and add to it when I need to, so that I keep them going. It's repeated calls from Chaim about the Steve Miller Band. Back in Black is coming up next, and that's a good call because there's much interesting to be learned from that, and it's also incredibly significant production-wise. Ziggy Stardust is just a delight, and there are some things I know about that. I'll be trying to research a little bit more, because I like the ones where I know a lot about how that stuff was done. Like where there are things like, oh, I've read a bunch of books about the Rolling Stones. Here's the Rolling Stones record, and I remember this and this and this and this and this about how they mic'd it. Oh yeah, Back in Black has this traumatic backstory as well. That's for damn sure. I'll be mentioning that to some extent, although the whole thing is not really like a MTV Cribs kind of thing where I'm talking about only the musicians. I'll talk about some of that stuff, but production is always key to the Evergreens podcast. I'm essentially going to be trying to tell you, how do you make this sound? That's what all of that stuff is about, is play this record so that you can hear it off of a turntable and preamplifier combination that really shows you what's on the grooves, shows you what's really there in its full intensity, and then try to explain, how do you make this sound? That's always what I'm going to be trying to do with that. And then yeah, the thing about Joe's Garage is I grew up on certain Zappa records like Apostrophe. I had not Overnight Sensation, although I did have that for a long time as well, but the 1975 one. The amazing 1975 one with all the incredibly complicated songs, and the band that Zappa got tired of because they were just such musos that they just wanted to play chess, and he wanted to get rock and rollers into the band, so he ended up ditching all of them and going with a bunch of younger, crazier musicians who were way less technically adept. But that is the Ruth Underwood, just a bunch of folks in there. One size fits all. I had that for a long time as well. And strangely, I had Zappa's Joe's Garage Acts 2 and 3 for absolutely forever, since I was a little kid. Like, I grew up on that, and I still remember not daring to play it very loudly because the lyrics were so scandalous and appalling. But I think I've identified one of the things that's going on, even to the point where I can demonstrate it, or I'll maybe do a little bit of that in the live stream, the music stream tomorrow. I think I figured out part of how he got his guitar tone on Watermelon and Easter Hay, which is a super classic Zappa solo. That, of course, is Joe's Garage 2 and 3. But if I did Joe's Garage, I could include all of them, perhaps. I think what he did on Watermelon in Easter Hay is it's clearly a Stratocaster. It's clearly got compression. I think it's got flanging. But I think he's also doing what he was doing with his SG a lot, which is a Dan Armstrong green ringer. And the Zappa sound, if I can find this in any of the Joe's Garage tracks, I'll know what to say about it, because at this point I recognize that sound instantly. The Dan Armstrong green ringer is a solo effect where it's basically just full wave rectifying the thing so that it starts sounding like it is a come to think of it, that could be a plugin. Let's make a note of that. Maybe it wouldn't be a very popular plugin because it'll sound really nasty, but nothing wrong with a little full wave rectifier plugin followed by or enclosed by a bandpass filter that lets it be constrained in such a way that it's not just making, a nasty DC offset in it. That could work. For those of you who do your guitar sounds in the box, green ringer plugin. That's something that I could throw in fairly easily. Zappa's, there have been many people putting humbuckers in Strats. Zappa, I don't know whether he was really early putting a humbucker in a Strat or not. I think that all kind of happened at roughly the same time. I got some questions earlier on there, so I need to pay attention to some of that, seeing as I'm getting to the point where I can go off and have a nap. I've only got about 10 minutes to go. So, no, Buttercomp doesn't have attack and release faders. It doesn't really work that way. The algorithm doesn't really think of things in that way. I also cannot add harmonics in a specific frequency range, although I can add distortion in a specific frequency range. And that adds harmonics, but I don't have the capacity to add individual harmonics to things. That's not really a thing. The realness calculation in tone generators, gosh. It has a factor in anywhere where you're quantizing and having to make yes or no decisions to a thing. As long as you're quantizing stuff to where you're coming out with the end number on the calculation, that's when the Benford realness thing can come into factor, because it's a statistical analysis tool that works on literal numbers, like decimal numbers. Rather than being just an analog feature, you got to bust things down into literal ones and twos and threes and fours to be able to do the Benford realness thing. Once you've done that, you can run that calculation on a large body of numbers and get a factor of how much Benford realness there is in the thing. And if you can do that, you can also make judgment calls and anything else that is assigning numbers and getting to choose between different possible numbers. So there is that. I should drink ginger tea too. One of the things I can do is I can make my oatmeal in the morning. And the way that I actually put flavor into that is I have a combination of stevia and ginger. So if I felt like getting more ginger in me, what I could do is just put a huge quantity of stevia ginger mixture into the oatmeal, and then it would be really strong, but I'd be sure getting a lot of ginger out of it. So there's that. I'm not sure if I could literally mix it up into ginger tea. Probably could. It would just have a sort of silt in the bottom. And I'd probably want to add more ginger to the mixture because otherwise it'd be very super sweet that way. Hard to say. Anyways, yeah, ginger tea. The Airwindows crew advocates for ginger tea. So I did have a number of other questions for folks, for anybody who's still here. Actually, seems like everybody's still here. They're just saying goodbye to Bo. Talk to you later, Bo. I wanted to get a sense on a couple of things. And one of them was which evergreen to do, so now I have a list of stuff that I can use. And there's another couple of possibilities, and here's one. Like I said, I'm able to spend some of my Patreon money on getting kits from things like Erica Synths. It says right on the box, DIY kit. It's a very cute little object. And one of the things that I can do is make videos where, and it could be live streaming, but it's actually not a great idea to keep up a constant running commentary and dialogue with people. And so I might be better off doing that with a separate camera and just recording my experience of taking something like this and taking it apart and going, look, this is what you get. Here's the thing. Comes with its own power cable. This is good. That's convenient. And here's the stuff that you get. This is the full kit. And it's including these things. And including these things. And then we're going to get together. And I am going to wire up this device and build it. The question becomes, with something like this, this is the Erica Synths baseline. So here's your little front panel. It comes with a distortion factor rather than the sort of chorusy thing that the kind that they sell with the Techno system comes with. And you're expected to populate this board. Oh wait, did I say this board? I meant these boards, because there's two of them in here. They seem to be a little stuck together in a way that I don't understand. But you're supposed to populate these boards by plugging these things into them in all the right places in the correct way and wire them all up. So one thing that I could do is start doing videos where when it's time to do that, and trust me, it's time to do this, I start following the instructions. Now, one thing I can't help but notice, I see no instructions here. I'm going to have to go and find where they are and print them out and walk through it. And I'll need to start assembling it and maybe do a running commentary of here's what it is like building this. This is what I'm going through. These are the things that I've made. These are the problems that I ran into. And I've seen other people do streams like that. Like Loading Ready Run has done some streams where it's people building devices or whatever. There's a fellow, Ian Horner, who's doing a stream called Tinker, Tailor, Solder, Fry. And that's basically the idea, is he's building an electronic circuit. And it's basically just hanging out with him for hours. Just going oh, and here we go, and I'm soldering this together. And he's sort of talking to you in a kind of abstracted way. But it's not really high intensity chatting about all of the things. It's more just kind of hanging out with somebody where they just idly talk about stuff. So I'm going to be doing some of these. I might not attempt to do the baseline synth first off, because that's a complicated piece of kit. I have built several Zox boxes. I've actually got them sitting over there. And I built those from kits. And it took just ages to build those, and it might be kind of challenging to do a web series of uploading clips of me building something like that. It would take an awfully long time. Now, another possibility is I'm still talking with a couple of my friends, like practically pre-Airwindows friends, so certainly folks that I've known for a while, and it never became a thing that I got together with White Sea and did a Minecraft thing. Like he was thinking about it for a while and then didn't get back to me, and it didn't end up being a thing. But I could still do that, and I'm sorting out like what kind of day would be good and like that, and sort of getting my friends together in such a way where I'd be doing it. I have to work on my computer a little bit in order to get it up to speed with doing that. There's some stuff that I'd need to do in order to make that be really effective. But in so doing, I could be doing a Minecraft stream for just kind of chilling and hanging out. And, you know, back in the day, I did hundreds of sort of gaming live streams doing exactly that. I started out all by myself, and I was doing this in character. I had a sort of fandom twist on it, where I was using a voice changer and playing a character that was working in Minecraft building stuff. And that was my initial launch into it. It's on another channel. It's not on the Airwindows channel. And I did like 100 of these and was taking it very seriously. I think at one point I was uploading daily, just like logging on. It's like, oh, and this is now what I do. Let's see if we can make this happen. And then had some friends join me, and we all started derping around doing stuff. And I did that for like hundreds of episodes. It's just that nobody was really paying attention to it because it's not like I was the best Minecraft YouTuber ever. And the whole concept was, there was some weird aspects to it. But if I was to just sort of add a stream as far as this is just me hanging out and doing a thing, then that's something that I could do on the Airwindows challenge and on the Airwindows channel. And that would help me as far as YouTube was concerned, because I would be regularly doing another YouTube thing. I don't think they really care as to what it is that I'm doing so much as they care about whether you're regular and how often you're doing stuff. So it's possible that adding that to the Airwindows thing so that there is at least programming on multiple days will help YouTube decide to publicize my Airwindows related streams, which is one of the reasons that you see the words live plugin Q&A on that stream. I'm also adding like live music as a little crawl in sort of the bottom of the live music stream, just so that people tuning in can get a kind of quick reference, like one of those chirons or taglines or whatever you call it, specifying what category this particular stream is in, because they would all be very, very different. And again, maybe doing more of that stuff on a more regular basis will help YouTube be paying more attention to me and helping the word get out for the stuff that I consider important. So yeah, when I do the plugin release videos, I'll be wanting to stick words on there. It's funny because when on the most recent plugin release, there was somebody who showed up and was making GUIs, and they were doing stuff like making switches that were like tube or MOSFET. And I'm like, what does that actually mean? What are you talking about? Like, what am I supposed to do with the sound that will make it distinguish between tube and MOSFET? It's like that's just being tacked on. And there was a lot of hype and big Airwindowses everywhere, a link to Patreon. That's never going to be in the interface of any of my plugins, no matter what. There will never be like a click here to pay me money in the interface of any of the damn plugins, because that's just not something I'm going to do. But I might be able to get YouTube to give me a little bit more traction, and that'd be pretty cool too. I'm not sure to what extent a coding stream makes sense. That would really depend upon, like, it's possible that it'll end up being, because I also don't feel that my current machine is strong enough to handle it, so I'm probably I'm thinking about maybe getting one of the newer Mac Minis, because the newer Mac Minis, oh goodness, I already have mid-side plugin stuff for. I've got a mid-side Edis Dim, and the stereo ones often do that. And there's one that I'm working on like lately that somebody specifically wanted, and I'm running it by them to sort of get their buy-in on it. And that is also based on a number of things involving, among other things, mid-side. So, yeah, it depends. Like, what even do you want out of stereo that is mid-side? That's the question to have for coming back next week and talking to me more. Because I'm never offended at getting bugged relentlessly about a thing, but I will be asking you constantly, what really do you want? What actually are you trying to produce? Because it's that kind of stuff. And no attack and release faders in Buttercomp. It doesn't work that way. And I cannot add individual harmonics under any circumstances. That's not how that works. Instead, you add more harmonics through distorting things, and you can narrow the zone of a frequency range that is, so the frequency range part can be set manually. You can have that distort, meaning that it will add harmonics that are not contained within the frequency range that it is, unless you use additional filters to make that be contained within the frequency range that it is. If I'm talking about an interstage update, it probably already is in the new updates file, because I keep the new updates file updated along with whatever other updates I do. And yeah, so I think I'm keeping my eye out for like sudden last minute questions, because I'm getting a flurry of last minute questions and a flurry of last minute watchers. And yeah, the answer to the thing about harmonics is can't do individual harmonics, can't do the frequency range. Honestly, it sounds like that's what people are talking about for the amp sim idea. And I'll highlight that. So this is what you'd be basically talking about is if you were talking about a plugin that can make harmonics from a particular frequency range, what you're talking about is, okay, filter, then distort, and then maybe filter again. Because then what you've got is you're constraining the input to a particular frequency range, you're distorting that, and then you're maybe filtering it again to suppress at least some of the frequencies that you're generating through the distorting. And the way that I'm doing the distorting is usually not a way that generates all of the harmonics at once. Like if you've got like a frequency, and maybe you've got it filtered so it's mostly just that frequency. Then if you do a soft saturation, you get third harmonic. More soft saturation, you start getting fifth harmonic. And you get a lot more third harmonic. You only start getting new ones as it starts filling up these previous ones. So you already get isolated harmonics, lower harmonics rather than higher ones. And you don't get to aliasing until you generated so many of them that you're starting to try to generate them at super high frequencies. You can also just aggressively clip, but that just starts giving you all the harmonics at once, including all the aliasing at once. So you don't want to just aggressively clip. Soft distortion is the way it's at. And you can certainly isolate that stuff by filtering before hitting the distortion. And you can also mute it a little bit. You wouldn't necessarily want to filter after the distortion so much, because that's not going to save you from aliasing. But all the same, there might be some benefits to a certain amount of that. Especially if you're trying to emulate some kind of guitar amp where you know you're not going to be having lots of super high frequencies coming out of it because it's a guitar speaker. So that could be a thing. So yeah, I'm thinking, yeah. Star Child with the Blade Runner GUI. Okay, I think on that note, and on a high point of the number of people who are watching, I don't know why that worked out, but whatever, that's fine. I will bid you good afternoon. I'll talk to you later. I'm going to see whether I can't rest up a little bit and be firing on all cylinders by next week. Got new stuff coming out of various kinds. I might be dedicating next week to just finishing up the monitoring update. And rather than getting like a new plugin video and stuff, I'll have Sunday I can really finish up everything that I need to do with monitoring, including the more intense version of cans, and then put out that and just kind of bump the threads and have that count as the release. That might work. In any case, I do have the monitoring update. It's been lingering for a while and I need to get moving on that. So with that, I will talk to you guys later. So bye-bye.